This is big time news for the Miami Dolphins because the NFL officially announced where they expect the NFL cap to be for 2025, and it's bigger and larger than we initially expected, which is huge news for the Miami Dolphins. We've been talking about how we expect to see this massive jump up over the past week and 2 weeks, which will be beneficial to the Dolphins, but we now are pretty much aware of what it will be in 2025, which has a huge impact on Chris Grier and this NFL offseason for Miami. And before we share all of the latest information, let's get to 67.5K subscribers. My boss has challenged us to get there on today's video, and good news is we're only 72 subscribers away. Join the channel for daily Miami Dolphins content as well as live shows. Hit that sub button. Let's get to 67.5K today. All right, here is the official news. Dan Graziano had it a couple days ago saying that the NFL informed teams that the 2025 cap for each squad will range between $277.5 million to $281.5 million, way up from last year's $255.4. Cap will have increased by more than $53 million over the last 2 seasons. And the number you see there, what it's going to expected to be, was not what it was expected to actually be. It was supposed to be in the smaller 270, 100, or 270 million. So the fact that it's between 277.5 and 281.5 is absolutely massive, because that increase helps Miami in a big way. And you might ask yourself, well, if it's only like $5 million, how is it really that impactful for the Miami Dolphins? Well, let me tell you how, because when looking at over the cap, and yeah, over the cap and Spotrac has it with 2 different things in terms of what the Dolphins have in cap space. I don't know why there is quite a big difference, but when you look at over the cap, that jump up, which these numbers now are reflective of the projected cap number that Dan Graziano just shared. The Dolphins are actually now cap compliant. Even after releasing Raheem Mostert, Durham Smythe, and Kendall Fuller, the Dolphins will still technically over the cap, but with this bigger jump in cap space than expected, Miami is now cap compliant, $1.5 million under. Now, effective cap space still has them over. That accounts for money that will be owed to their NFL draft class. So, yeah, but that's a future issue. Right now, if the league year started and they needed to be under the cap, well, they would be under the cap. You see the active spending they have and the dead money, which is the reason why when you factor in the draft class, they technically still are over the cap right now, but it's not the biggest issue that the Dolphins are working with right now. And we've talked a lot about Chris Grier and how poorly he has mismanaged the building of the roster, the cap space, the whole 9 yards. This might be good work by Grier, because when he released Fuller, Mostert, and Smythe last week, we were like, all right, Mostert and Smythe made a lot of sense, but why did they release Kendall Fuller? Because I thought he played pretty well last season for Miami. Yeah, he only played 11 games and battled multiple concussions and is on the plus side of 30, but his cap number wasn't astronomically high. It only saved just under $3 million, so it's like, was it worth cutting him? Well, if Grier had inside info, if you will, that the moves Miami would make between those 3 players would ultimately get them cap compliant due to a higher jump in cap space by the NFL than what was expected, well, then you have to be on the lookout for Grier and say, all right, well, a little round of applause here, because you knew something was coming, and it was a good move to just make those 3 cuts to be cap compliant now, and now you can start to look at other moves to be made in free agency, in the draft, and contract restructures. So I maybe give Grier a little bit of credit for knowing that this was coming. And with this upcoming offseason being a massive one for the Miami Dolphins, speak your truth. Do you trust Chris Grier? Type T for trust, type D for don't. It's today's pinned comment, so if you hit with YouTube ad break, scroll down, let it play, and answer today's question. This is a make or break year for Chris Grier. He has been here for way too long, and it's resulted in absolutely no playoff wins for Miami. If the Dolphins miss the playoffs again this year, they will likely move on from him and Mike McDaniel. But with the lack of addressing of the offensive line, the safety room needing to be overhauled, Grier needs to utilize the improved cap space given by the NFL in free agency as well as the draft. If Chris Grier does not find a way to figure out the left guard and right guard positions for the Miami Dolphins in free agency, this will be a mistake by him, and it will ultimately lead in him potentially being on the outs after this season. They got to figure it out in NFL free agency. And by making these moves so necessary, I would expect the Miami Dolphins to still be on the lookout for ways to create cap space before March 10th, which is when free agency officially opens. They can do this by releasing other players. They can do it by restructuring contracts. We've talked about these 5 names before, and I think it's important to bring it up again because it's interesting to see what the front office is given leeway to do. How free are they to push some of these money issues down the line? How much job security do they believe they have? Because if they believe they have true job security, well, then maybe they don't move on from restructure to his contract. But if they know they have to win now, well, maybe they do restructure to his contract. Because you could create $19.1 million in cap space by pushing a lot of the money to 2027 and 2028 and giving yourself more time now. You can do the same thing with Teron Armstead, Bradley Chubb. All of these numbers you see next to these players are potential cap space numbers you get for restructure contracts. You could do it with Zach Sealer too and create $5.5 million. So there's a lot of different ways Miami can create cap space without cutting guys, but it will just push some of the cap in dead money towards future seasons, which is not really the best either, but how badly do you want to win now, right? And with so many needs on this football team needing to be addressed, obviously number 1 is the entire interior offensive line. Number 2 is the safety room, defensive line. And then this is a new one. It used to be backup quarterback is my 4th biggest need, with off-ball linebacker being 2. Well, number 4 has now been changed to boundary corner, because right now the cornerback room for Miami is not good. You have Ethan Bonner, you have Cam Smith, you have Storm Duck, you have Jalen Ramsey, and that's it. Kader Kohou's a restricted free agent. Kendall Fuller got released. So you now need to re-sign Kader Kohou to probably be your nickel on a cheap contract. But you also need to find someone to be the opposite boundary corner to Jalen Ramsey, because if I'm going to be honest, I don't trust Cam Smith, Storm Duck, or Ethan Bonner to be that this upcoming season. And if the Dolphins roll in the training camp with one of those guys fighting for that number 2 spot, well, the Dolphins might be in a world of hurt. But I want to actually focus in on that safety position, as we have done a lot in the offseason. But we actually got some news revolving the safety market in NFL free agency, because there was a safety that was expected to hit free agency that is no longer going to be on the open market, because this player, Elijah Molden, re-signed with the Los Angeles Chargers on a 3-year, $18.75 million deal, $13.5 million guaranteed. This is a fascinating deal because Molden was one of the top safeties out there. Now, is he the best? No, he probably came in number 8 on my list of free agent safeties available, but he was an option for Miami if they couldn't land one of these other top guys and wanted to go cheap. And the reason why I want to talk about Molden and this contract is because I think it gives you a lot of intel on where some other safeties might ultimately sign. Like Molden getting 3 years for 18 mil isn't a lot. 6 mil per season. Ultimately can get out of that contract after a couple years with only 13 of it being guaranteed. This might tell you where Cisco, Blackmon, Jeremy Chin might ultimately get on the open market. The guys on the left might get larger contracts, but those other 3 guys on the right, just ahead of Molden, yeah, we might know where they're heading in terms of price tags this offseason. And before we talk more about that, make sure you get hooked up with the best Dolphins gear. Go to our link, chatsports.com/Dolphins gray shirt. Well, you'll get $5 off this Dolphins gray shirt. I'm a big fan. Got the nice little 2-colored logo there, as well as the Miami Dolphins. Big fan of this shirt. Like I said, the link will be in the description and comments of today's video. Chatsports.com/Dolphins gray shirt. Get you $5 off right now. Start representing the Dolphins as the summer months are ahead of us. All right, as I react to that Elijah Molden re-signing with the Los Angeles Chargers, that contract is what I want to talk about because that deal for Molden, he's a good player, but it tells me that the next up tier of guys like Andre Cisco, like Julian Blackmon, will likely get around $7, $8, $9 million, which has been the projection for the entire offseason, but it only solidifies in that line of thinking of what they're going to be paid, and that is very kind for Miami. These two, Cisco and Blackmon, are two of the top mid-tier, very affordable free agents at the safety position that Miami could go after. They both have their positives, they both have their negatives, but getting one of these two guys on $7, $8, $9 million per season on multiple years would be very, very good use of money and good value for this Dolphins front office. These two of guys we've been talked about quite a bit, and each of them have their own positives, right? Like Andre Cisco played really well in the run game last year, only a 13.9 missed tackle percentage, but had one of his best years in coverage. Julian Blackmon, one of the best coverage safeties there is. He's just a free safety roamer, can play the nickel a little bit as well. He had a QB rating of 91.2 when getting targeted last season. Turned the ball over quite a bit as well. 3 interceptions, only allowing 2 touchdowns. But he isn't as good as a tackler as Andre Cisco is. Blackmon and Cisco are both two really good mid-tier safety targets for the Dolphins. We've talked about these two at depth in the past, and I would expect them to get $7, $8, $9, maybe $10 million per season on 2 or 3 years, just topping Elijah Molden's contract. Like I'm telling you, Julian Blackmon on a 3-year, $22 million deal seems more and more likely after seeing what Elijah Molden just got, and that is a contract that I would really like to see Chris Grier invest in alongside some of these free agent offensive line targets. And we're going to look at some offensive line targets here in just a second, but pick a safety for me. You saw the numbers, you saw the contract projections. Which safety would you prefer Miami signing, whether it's alongside Javon Holland or replacing Javon Holland? AC for Andre Cisco or JB for Blackmon? Let's get over to some interior offensive lineman fits because we know that is the top need for the Miami Dolphins. And in a recent article, Barry Jackson talked to an NFL evaluator who labeled 4 of the free agent offensive linemen that best fit the Dolphins. Will Fries, James Daniel, Mekhi Becton, and Aaron Banks were the top 4 names that were mentioned. They didn't mention Trey Smith just due to probably the price tag of Smith. But we've talked in depth about Fries and Daniels. We've mentioned Becton, but we really haven't talked about Banks that much. But the reason why these 4 are such good fits for the Miami Dolphins is because they are excellent run blockers, which is exactly what Miami needs to add to this offensive line. But they're also excellent in a specific type of scheme that Miami runs quite a bit. You look at these 4 guys' numbers, and yes, we have documented Will Fries and James Daniels getting hurt, so they have played significantly less snaps in the run game as the other 2, and Mekhi Becton and Aaron Banks. And when you see those snap numbers, those are just running plays, not just the total season. But Will Fries and James Daniels were 2 of the highest graded run blockers last season, but specifically when you look at the zone run scheme grade, number 1 and number 2. Becton was number 13, so he ranked pretty highly out of the 150 guards that were graded. Banks very consistent as a top 50 guard, which is still very good, just not as highly as the other 3 here mentioned. But the reason why the first 2 that we've talked about so often, Daniels and Fries, are so mentioned and linked to Miami is because of that zone run grade. The Dolphins' offensive scheme, specifically on the offensive line, requires athleticism and it requires efficiency in the zone scheme type of blocking. Because what does Miami do a lot of? They get on the perimeter, whether it's end arounds, sweeps, halfback tosses. They run to the outside. And you need your interior offensive linemen, left guard, center, right guard, to be able to get to the second level, get their hands on linebackers, safeties, pull, get to the outside, get in front of these speedy backs like Jalen Wright and Devon Achane. And Fries can do it. Daniels can do it. Becton can do it. Now, Fries and Daniels have the injury concern, but when they're on the football field, they're two of the most athletic and efficient guards at getting in that zone run scheme, getting to that next level, which makes them such intriguing targets for Miami. Fries is going to be a little bit more pricey than Daniels. Fries probably get $13, $14, $15 million per season at minimum. Daniels, you don't know because he's a little bit older and he's coming off a pretty massive Achilles injury. Becton coming off of a career year, but there's a lot of injury questions there as well. Either way, I am very, very excited for March 10th. Why that date? Well, that's the day that you can start tampering and start negotiating with some of these prospects that are in free agency. And boy, oh boy, is it going to be an interesting 4 or 5 days when that period opens, because Chris Grier needs to address the offensive line, man. We could talk about the safety room, which we have done at nauseum. We've talked about the offensive line free agent targets and what Grier needs to do at nauseum as well. But the truth is this. The offensive line is so important. You've got every beat reporter, every content creator pounding the table to Chris Grier, please address the offensive line. We have the left tackle, center, right tackle figured out. Jackson, Brewer, and then either Paul or Armstead. But you need to solidify that left guard, right guard spot. Get back to being able to play good running complementary football in December, in January, because that is how you will win in the NFL and win playoff games if you're lucky to be back in the postseason next year. If Grier doesn't address the offensive line in free agency, I'm going to crash out. And I know some people might say, well, he's got the draft to do so. But there's so many needs on this football team. The draft is so deep at big-time positions like running back, like tight end, like defensive line, like corner, that I think offensive line needs to be the top thing to address in free agency, and then we can move forward to the defense in the draft. All right, make sure you are subscribed. That'll do it for today's video. We will have content coming out this weekend as well as next weekend. Make sure you subscribe too, because the NFL Combine is next week. We'll have clips, interviews, and quotes from these prospects that have met with the Dolphins. Mike McDaniel meeting with the media. We'll have his full interview up on the channel as well. So hit that sub button and stay locked in for the best Dolphins coverage on YouTube.